So we'll talk a little bit in this next session about timelines and what does it look like to be substantially approvable, and why is that important to be substantially approvable? Does anybody know what you get when you turn everything in and it's substantially approvable? You get a bonus. It's something wonderful. Money, yes, it is connected to money, Diane. It is your obligation date. So we'll be talking about the obligation date. Yes, and the deadline is July. To turn them in is the suggested date is July 1st to get your obligation date. Okay, so next slide. So you've already should have been notified, and if you didn't get notified, that's good news. That because if you aren't eligible anymore for some of the subgrants, you were supposed to be notified from financial that you were not eligible any longer. For example, Title V or something like that. You estimated allocations are up now on the website. Final allocations, by that time they'll have sorted out all the funding sources and double checked everything and found allocated to new charters and things like that. Well, from last year, charters that are coming in. So that would be in around September. And then the new public school academies, those adjustments happen in February 2021. They'll find out what their allocations are. Okay, next. Okay, and this is what Diane was mentioning. To receive a July 1st obligation date, that's the earliest you can get one. Local educational agencies, that's you, must submit the Title I school selection application. So we know about that. Some people just hear about the consolidated application, but of course we must have both, because the Title I school selection is the application. It's what tells us what you're planning and how you're going to distribute the consolidated application funding that you designate in the consolidated application. The Title I helps you decide what Title I services and who they're going to, what building, and how much. So we must receive both of them at the same time, so we can check to see if what you said in the TIS aligns with the money that you're distributing in the consolidated app. And again, it says in substantially approvable form on or before July 1st. And the budget must reflect the 2021 program year. So they want you to look at the whole year and make sure that all of your requests are in the right grant and that they are complete. Okay, and if you don't get it done on July 1st, many people, that's their only vacation time, or the district isn't planning on spending any money in July. Then they sometimes, send it in a few weeks later, but you're always at risk if, oh, I forgot about that teacher that went to the math conference or something, or at this point, listened to the math conference or participated in the math conference, and oh, I don't have an approved application yet, consolidated app, and I didn't get that turned in yet. Well, then you can't pay for whatever happens in July if you have not turned in your consolidated application and tests and a couple other things we're going to talk about. So again, if you have people working in the summer or you have a professional learning, you really want to get that July 1st deadline turned in. But if you don't, as I said, like if you turn it in July 8th after you come back on vacation, or your finance person, you didn't know they were leaving and you need stuff from her or him, then you turn it in late. That's your new obligation date, July 8th or whenever you turn it in, and that's when you will be able to start spending your funding. And the financial people are the ones that sometimes discover this, that you started spending money before you had an obligation date. And of course, we're trying to monitor it too, the consultants are. So next slide. all the time we, as consultants, we feel like one of our major jobs is preventing you from getting into any trouble with the auditors. So these are your warnings and communication about that. Again, something else that's always been about your obligation date is, but we've been told management wants to enforce this a little bit more this year. So if we send you something back, let's say we get your application June 30th and we get 30 other ones, but we get it back to you in 30 days or 20 days, you have 30 days from that time to respond to notifications about modification, respond to our comments on what you need to change. So you don't have like 3 months or 4 months, it's 30 days, or your obligation date can be changed to a later date. So we don't want that happening. We just wanted to remind you right now that really the protocol has always been that 30 days, you have 30 days to respond or you're at risk of losing your obligation date. And then after you're notified from that letter, then you have 15 days to, get that completed. We're always at your, we'll respond to your emails or telephone calls, or we can walk you through problems that you're having with modifications. Please, work with us on that, especially if you knew something you might not have known that you only have those 30 days to get back to us. Okay, I think I've told us that. Told you enough about that. Next, please. Okay, what does that mean, substantially approvable? So let's, somebody again's new or something and, oh, of course, this doesn't happen in any of our districts. It's other parts of the state, I think, that don't get this stuff done. Ours are almost all perfect, but the single building district improvement plan has been submitted. The DIP has to have been submitted. We'll accept application submissions until September 30th, but you could work on it before that. Development, and these are you can read the bullets and what needs to be done there. Title I's, we need to have the Title I school selection, as I mentioned before. We have to have that. We have to have your DIP. We have to have, well, you're accepted already. The 1920, as it says, will be accepted for applications. And all of the components of the Consolidated app have been completed. So if you have Title I and Title II, but you forgot to fill out the rest of Title II, or you left money in Title II, we're telling you ahead of time, please complete all parts of the Consolidated app, or we do have to return it to you. And also, we've been reminded, but from fiscal, that you need to apply for 100% of your allocation. You can't just leave part of it as a savings account for next year or next summer. You really have to plan it all now. And I know that's difficult, but that's why we have amendment times. You can have a plan, and then at amendment time, when amendment window opens, you can change that as much as you need to and update it. So you do have time, but we want to know again that, and our legislators need to know that we need the funding and we are spending it and budgeting it. So thank you for that ahead of time. All right, next slide. Just clarify too that the PET is no longer required to be submitted in Assessor Cognia, but as Ben Borkel has reminded us, the federal and state programs must be evaluated on an annual basis, and you must maintain that documentation of the evaluations of how you spent the funding on all of your programs. Okay, we'll talk about the funding that Yes, some funding may be decreased, but at this point, the estimated allocations are not, and that will be addressed later. Next slide. Good questions. Okay, here is our question break. So anything in the chat box for me?
I believe that everything that's been in there has
David?
been able to be answered by one of the other consultants. And with the last one about the state or the federal funds possibly being substantially reduced, I think you just indicated that was going to be covered later.
Yes, we will discuss that a little bit more. And thank you, Andrea.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrea Nessel, and I am the consultant for all of the districts in Berrien, Cass, St. Joe, and Van Buren counties. So I will be discussing the Title I school selection application today. So David, we can go ahead and move forward a couple slides. So the biggest change for some of you will be the fact that there is no longer a long form TIS or a short form TIS. There is just one TIS. There's one Title I school selection that all LEAs will be responsible for. There will be some LEAs that have a shorter version of it because screen 3 will not show for you, and I'll get into that and which LEAs are affected by that, but it's the same TIS for everybody. So for some of you, that'll be a bit of a learning curve for you, but don't panic. Your consultants will help you, and let me say this now, and I will probably say it again. Please use the help screens for the TIS and for the consolidated application. We say this every year, but yet we still have districts that end up with the need for us to send the application back for modifications that could have been avoided by using the help screens. So using the help screens ultimately will get you your money faster, because you will have less of a need for modifications. What I suggest to my districts, and I know other consultants do the same, is to go ahead and print out the help screens. Or if you have 2 monitors, maybe have the help screens on a separate monitor, so that as you're going through the TIS and the consolidated application, you can take that help screen piece by piece by piece. So I would suggest this even if you have been doing the consolidated application for years. I would have those help screens available and go through them step by step. Those help screens change slightly year to year, so you will find some very helpful things in that. One more thing on that, just so you know, most of us, when we take phone calls with questions, I would say about 80% of the time for me, when I give you the answer, I'm actually reading right from the help screen to you. It's not to say we don't want to take your questions. We're happy to help you, but if you can't get a hold of us, or we're busy, or as on now, we will be on temporary partial layoff. So if you can't get a hold of us on our layoff days, then that will be helpful to you. Okay, so if you used to do the short TIS, that prior screen 7 will now be split between screens 2 and 4. And the prior screen 9 will now be on screen 5. So it used to be that some of you could opt out. If you had the short TIS, some of you could opt out of screen 9. That's no longer an option. You can't opt out of any of this. The main reason for that is that we were not able to fully adhere to legislative requirements and collect all the data that was needed by doing those 2 different forms of the TIS. So by doing the same form, we can collect all the data that we need for our federal reporting requirements. Okay, next slide. So in screen 1, just a reminder, screens 1 and 2 will be locked at amendment time. So when you amend the TIS, you will only be amending past screen 2. Everyone will choose grade spans for this screen. So you will, and in the past, some of you were able to opt out of this and did not have to choose grade spans. You will choose the best fit for your grade spans, but all LEAs must assign a grade span. Okay, next slide. So screen 2 is the data on schools in the district. So we started this shift last year by pre-populating in column 2A your public fall count. The reason for using the public fall count is it is the most accurate count that we have by the time we hit this grant cycle, because it runs through all these different filters at the state level. So last year, a lot of you were asking questions saying, hey, I see this public fall count, but it doesn't match the reports that I have back at the district. The reports that you might be pulling back at the district does not account for some of the filters that it goes through at the state. Things like direct certified students, things like non-graded students. There are a lot of different factors that weigh into this. So please know the public fall count data that will be pre-populated is correct. It is accurate. That is the count we would like you to use. Now, there will be some exceptions. If you can see on this screen, you will see 2 boxes on screen 2 that you could check if you need to use your spring count data. So the reasons for using the spring count data could be that you have undergone reconfiguration in the last year, and so you need to adjust that pupil count, or that you had significant changes in enrollment between the fall and spring count. Now, at the last spring workshop we did, we got the question, well, what constitutes a significant change in enrollment? That really should be a discussion with your consultant. We can't give you a number on that. I would, in my opinion, if you have a change in enrollment that would drastically affect rank and serve of your schools, then that might be something you want to consider, but have a discussion with your consultant on that. If you take a look at this screen, you will see the pre-populated data in column 2A, and then in column 2B, that is where you type in your numbers. If column 2B numbers do not match column 2A, you will get an error message and cannot submit. If there's a mismatch, you must check one of the boxes above. All right, so the only reason for a mismatch is if you're using spring count data for one of the 2 reasons above. Okay, next screen. Further on another thing to really note on this screen, and this is really important. So it used to be that on this screen, you would have to put in your private school numbers. Please do not put private school numbers. Please put zeros for private schools, regardless of whether or not you have private schools participating. Every single LEA needs to put zeros in for the private schools. This is going to be different than the directions that you're given. The reason for this is we found this issue after it was too late to make changes in MEGs. So this will change next year. The directions will be correct, but this year it was too late for that deadline for MEGs. So the only place where you're going to put private school numbers is in your equitable services calculation worksheet. So please make sure you make note of this. This will be something that we'll have to send back to you for a modification if you put numbers in that screen. So this is a really quick, easy fix to not have it sent back for modifications. I'm going to stop halfway through these TIS slides for questions. So we won't go all the way through all the screens in the TIS without stopping for questions. Okay, next screen. So screen 3 is the screen that some of you will not see. If you are an LEA with less than 1,000 students, screen 3 will not show for you, because if you are an LEA with less than 1,000 students, all of your school buildings are eligible for title services. So screen 3 is not necessary for you. If you are an LEA with 1,000 or more students, you will see in screen 3, and you have 3 steps here, which are outlined on this screen. But David, I'm gonna actually have you move to the next screen where we can see what screen 3 looks like. And I'll explain that. So if you have 1,000 students or more, this is the screen that you will see, and you will take 3 steps. Step number 1, so let me back up. With the ranking methodology, any buildings with 75% or more poverty percentage, you will be serving those first. However, you do have the option, this was new, this was recently new last year in legislation. If you have a high school that has a poverty percentage of 50% or more, you can choose to serve those high school buildings before you serve your buildings with 75% or more poverty, okay? This is completely up to you. To be honest, I didn't have any schools do this. I don't think my team had any districts choose this option. We had very few districts in the state choose this option, but this is an option if you want. So you would check the box in step 1. Step 2 is your grouping method that you will use, and this will be new for some of you. So you can either choose to group the schools by the district-wide grouping, which means that eligible schools will be served in rank order regardless of grade span. So you could have a middle school with a higher poverty percentage that needs to be served before an elementary school. Or you can choose the grade span grouping, where you determine which grade spans you're going to serve. I have more districts do this because they choose to serve their secondary buildings with 31A funds. They choose to serve them in a different way, which is fine. What option you pick here is truly up to you. You can talk to your consultant about why you would choose one over the other. You can also play around with it a little bit. You can choose one, save the screen, see what happens, and then choose another, save the screen, see what happens. So again, talk to your consultant if you have questions about this. And then step 3, if all of your eligible buildings, I'm sorry, let me back this up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Step 3, you have the option to include all buildings that have 35% or more low income, regardless of the district's average. So if you want to pull more buildings in for eligibility, this would be the box that you check. And again, the help screen will help you on this. Okay, we're going to take a quick break for questions. So David, do we have some questions that have not been answered in the chat box?
Really, the only thing that I've seen come up has been about 31A funding, and I think Gail and Shelley addressed that as unsatisfactorily best they could.
Okay. I see something from Wes. Is the grade grouping option on screen 3 based on what is entered in screen 1? Yes, as far as what your grade spans are, yes. Okay, we can go on.
There's
All
one
right.
more, Andrea. There's one more from
Oh, I'm
Amanda.
sorry. There's one more.
Oh, yeah, it's our high school is Title I eligible but not receiving. In step 2 of screen 3, do we just select the K4 and 5-8 grade spans?
No, in step on screen 3, you'll select whatever grade spans you choose to serve. So that was just an example. That was an example of someone that's choosing not to serve their 912 buildings, but you can choose to serve them if you wish.
And I'll add to that comment that Dr. Rice has sent a request to all the superintendents to request from their federal legislators their concerns about keeping the federal funding coming in also. But it's not just, either one of them will, result in cuts that we don't want, that we don't hope don't happen. So it's the state 31A impact, which people have expressed. Yes, that could be a negative impact, but that's for state legislators, really. That's all the progress we could make would be with them. But also it's important to contact the federal legislators on, their potential cuts in the federal funding. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, so screen 4, this example, I've got 2 examples of screen 4. So this example that you see here is a district that has chosen the district-wide grouping method on screen 3. And in this case, when they choose the district-wide method, the schools, as you can see, are listed here in order of percent low income, regardless of the grade span. So you can see here in this district, they've got a middle school and a high school that needed to be served prior to their prior to an elementary school. So in this screen, you're going to have to identify the Title I status of all eligible schools. And the screen looks new to some of you. The formerly known as short TIS people, that you have not seen this one before. So this is where you will identify your buildings as school-wide or targeted, but what's new here are 2 other options to click skipped or unfunded. So in this example, the only building they can unfund would be the high school because it's the last school in the list, because they chose the district-wide grouping average. And I'll show you the difference on the next slide with that. So this is for LEAs with 1,000 or more students. All right, you wanna go to the next screen, David? The next screen shows an example of an LEA that chose the grade span grouping. So here you can see they've chosen to unfund 2 buildings, and they can do that with the last building in each grade span. So you can see the lowest poverty elementary school they are choosing to unfund, and the lowest poverty high school they are choosing to unfund. So they have a little more flexibility in that because of the grade span. So that's one example of how choosing one option or the other might affect what you need to do. So again, it's based on your needs and what you're doing with each of the schools and your priorities. Okay, next screen, which is screen 5. So this looks similar. If you did the short TIS last year, this is similar to screen 9 in the short TIS. So this is what the old screen looked like. In the old screen, we have rows E through H. Those rows are going to completely go away. You will only see rows A through D. So if you want to go to the next screen, you can see what that will look like. And the reason for that is we are eliminating the need to specify a lower per student amount if applicable. So in the past, when you got to this screen, if all of your eligible buildings were 35% or more low income, you had the option to choose a different per pupil amount, lower than what the system automatically generated for you. We're going to take that away. And if you are eligible for that, that is automatically going to come up as 1 cent per pupil. So you won't have to type that in. The system will know if all of your eligible buildings have 35% or more low income, and it will automatically populate that in screen 6 that you have the option to do a per pupil amount of 1 penny or more. This is really key. Screens 5 and 6 for me, and I'm going to venture to guess that for my other teammates, are probably one of the biggest reasons why I send applications back. Screens 5 and 6 have a lot of numbers in them that you input that are spit out to you that have to match what's in the consolidated application. So for instance, on this screen that you see in front of you, if you are telling me on row B that you are transferring $20,000 from Title II to Title I, and I go to your Title II budget and take a look at what you've transferred from Title II into your building level budgets for Title I, and it doesn't add up to $20,000, I need to send everything back to you. So these screens need to match. If on row A, the amount you're giving to the private school does not match the amount that I see in your equitable services worksheet, or match the amount that you've budgeted for the private schools, I have to send this back. Again, the help screens are going to be really, really key here for you. That's what's going to help get you through this without having to have it bounce back and forth for modifications. The more it bounces back for modifications, the longer it will take to get your funding to you. At amendment time, please make sure you are amending these amounts. That's another reason why it gets sent back is districts will open up their amendments and they'll change some of the amounts on the screen, but not all of them, or they, again, won't match what's in the application, or they'll forget to change these amounts. So please make sure that happens at amendment time. Okay, next screen. So this next part, this is a little tough for me to talk about this screen when the picture of the screen is on the next slide. So let me talk through a little bit of this and then we'll bump to the next slide. So in the past, districts that were doing the short form TIS did not have to allocate a certain amount per pupil. That has changed. All LEAs will have to establish a certain per pupil amount for title funding. Again, this screen 6 will be the screen where if you fall into eligibility where all of your eligible schools have a poverty percentage of 35% or more, you will get to choose that amount per pupil. It'll be 1 penny or above. If you have a skipped school, so you're skipping the school and you are choosing to serve them with 31A for a Title I-like program instead, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, then you will have the ability, your ability to put data in column 4, which I'll show you in a minute, which is where you put your title per pupil amount, that will be blocked. Let me throw this in here now because this has been a misconception by some. If you skip a school with 31A funds, that doesn't mean, for instance, if my high school pulled into eligibility, let's say my high school was 80% poverty, so I have to serve them, right? I don't have that option. They're over 75%, I have to serve them. If they pull into that eligibility and I have to serve them, and I say, well, but I really don't want to pull some of those title funds away from the elementaries. I already give them 31A, so I'm just going to skip them. You're not skipping them to do what you've already been doing with 31A funds. When you skip a school, you are still required to take a portion of your 31A funds to create a Title I-like program. And you will enter in the TIS in screen 7, which I'll show you in a minute, what that Title I-like program is. So if you've always been using 31A money for, let's say, intervention classes at the middle school for 8th grade math, you've always been doing that. That's not what you're putting in screen 7. This is for a Title I-like program that's not what you've always been doing with the other 31A money. Okay, and I know that can sound a little confusing, but just have some conversations with your consultant about that to make sure that you're following that. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to the next slide, David, and I think that I can explain this just a little bit better. So there's where you see column 4. That column 4 is the column that will be blocked if you are choosing to fund skip a school and fund with 31A. All the schools that are listed on screen 6 will have to get some sort of per pupil funding. You won't be able to leave that blank. If there's a school that that's pulling into eligibility that you're thinking, no, I actually want to unfund this school, you're going to have to go back to screen 4 to mark them as unfunded. Okay. Next screen. So the next screen is what you will see if you choose to skip a school. This is screen 7. For those of you that had skipped schools in the past, this used to be screen 8, but it's screen 7 now. The skipped school screen has changed a little bit. It used to be you just wrote a couple comments about what you were going to do with the 31A funds to create the Title I-like program. Now this screen is going to look more like what you see in the consolidated application budgets. And you're going to have to follow that protocol for writing budget items, which means we need the same amount of detail in screen 7 as we would need in the consolidated application. We need the function code. You can see in this example, we need to know what the FTE is, what that teacher is going to do, who is that teacher going to serve. We need the object codes, the salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, and materials. All of that will have to go here. And again, it will follow the same rules. So you could use the help screen for writing Title I consolidated application budget items to help you fill screen 7, to help you fill out screen 7 here. That's what this second bullet, I think the second bullet on this screen here is a little misleading, where it says TIS budget details must align with the consolidated application budget details. That doesn't mean your numbers align with something in the consolidated application. That's what I just said, as far as you need to follow the same protocols for writing your budgets in screen 7 that you would do when you write your budgets in the consolidated application. You do have a limit on this screen of 15 budget items per school. So if you've skipped more than one school, when screen 7 pops up, you will see room to put budgets in for all those separate schools. Okay, and the final slide. So this final slide about foster care is in these TIS slides primarily because you do have the option to allocate Title I funds to cover foster care transportation. And if you do that, it needs to go into the TIS in screen 5 under other district level reservations. So if you decide you need to set aside $1,000 of Title I funds to allocate for foster care transportation, you would put that $1,000 in the district level budget, explain what you're going to do, and then on screen 5 of the TIS, next in the row that says other district reservations, you would put that $1,000. And again, the help screens will help you, and your consultant can help you with that. But just some other things about foster care, as long as we're talking about it, just keep in mind that all students experiencing foster care are eligible to receive Title I and 31A services. It doesn't matter what building they're attending. It doesn't matter if they're in a building that is not a title building. They are still eligible. They are also eligible for free meals. And you can create a list of students experiencing foster care by running a report in MEGS. And in this 4th bullet, it tells you exactly what that report is. And it is refreshed every 2 weeks. And you're encouraged to complete a student record maintenance following enrollment activity to make sure that these lists stay accurate. Okay, David, what do we have for questions?
The only new question that I see in the main chat is, when will the 2021 application be at MEGS? My level 5 says it's not available yet.
Right. So, Anne, I asked this question yesterday, and I was told that there is a test going on with it right now to test a glitch. And once that has been taken care of, it will be available. They are hoping to have it be available sometime within the next week. So I'm sure as the consultants get more information, we'll let you know, and we also inform you when it's gone live. But it should be very soon. They're just fixing a couple little glitches right now. You're welcome, Anne. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Please know that as we go through each section, if you suddenly think, oh shoot, I wish I would have asked that, feel free to put it in the chat, and David will hold on to that question when we have breaks for questions, and we can go back to that. That's all for me.
Okay, hi, this is Shelley Patton, and I cover Muskegon, Ottawa, and Allegan counties. And I'm going to go over the few updates / clarifications in the Consolidated app. Not nearly as many changes as the TIS, so that's good. Go ahead, David. So as you remember, we made some drastic changes to the equitable access screen last year. The law is very clear in that we have to discuss barriers surrounding students, staff, and parents. So we revamped this, created some help screens, and we still had some difficulties last year. Everybody understanding the change, getting the changes into MEGS Plus. So we have updated our help screens, so please take a look at those. And they will give you some very good examples, which are also listed here on the next few screens. So David, if you want to go ahead to the next screen. The equitable access, the federal statute actually lists 6 types of barriers: gender, race, national origin, color, disability. And I can't see my screen. Hold on a second. And age, of course. The barriers should be identified that could hinder, this says student, but it's really student, staff, or parent access to federally funded programs. Go ahead, David. So if you think of common types of barriers for students, there could be things like gender, race, color, national origin, disability, age. I'm not going to read the whole screen to you, but you could think of an example here could be an applicant that proposes to carry out a model science program for secondary students. They may be concerned that girls may be less likely than boys to enroll in the course. So you could tell us what the barriers are to the girls and how you might overcome those barriers. Go ahead, David. When you think of staff, some of the same barriers may come into play. There could be a stereotyping issue with gender, race, color, national origin again, any disabilities, age. Sometimes there's policies and procedures that discriminate. So again, if you are, you could propose to hire staff to provide federally funded services, you might describe how you're going to avoid any one of those barriers. When you do this in MEGS Plus, you do not have to list all of your barriers for students, all of your barriers for staff, or all of your barriers for parents. We understand that there are many, but please pick at least 1 or 2 for each of these and really give us the answer. What is the barrier and how will this be overcome? Okay, next. Parents, very similarly, could be gender, race, color, national origin, disability, and age. And of course, a very common barrier for parents could be their language. So you could talk to us about how you will provide and eliminate barriers for the non-English speaking parents. Talk about translating documents or offering translators at different meetings, things like that. Okay, go ahead. We started to do some work on function codes across all of MDE for consistency purposes, because we know that you all have many applications with different offices. So all of the offices are working together to try to take the accounting code manual, which we encourage you to use greatly, and come together on final decisions on function codes being used for certain programs or certain things in a program. So we started to do this work last year. We wanted to remind you of some of that, and we have some new clarifications for you this year as we work through this. And function codes are important, as you will hear from our fiscal auditors later, so that we're not getting audit findings, which we don't want. Basic programs, when you're using function code 111, 112, or 113, that's an elementary, middle school, and high school function code. Those are for basic programs. So this takes place quite often, of course, in a school-wide building. And now more recently can also take place in Title IV with instructional programs that may span a grade level or span an entire school. Keep in mind, you can use these function codes occasionally in a targeted building, but you need to work with your consultant on this. Occasionally, like in this example, you may need to purchase scientific calculators for the entire 8th grade math class. And if you're a title building, you could take a prorated amount of Title I money to pay for part of those calculators. But even though you may have 80% of your kids, you're telling us 80% of your kids are title eligible targeted, that doesn't mean you can use 80% of your title money to pay for those. A typical title program should be serving 20 to 25% at the most. Therefore, working with your consultant, you will be allowed 20 to 25% to pay for those calculators. Any after-school clubs or field trips, those typically open to all kids. Those should be in the hundreds as well, a 111, a 112, or a 113. Those of you that may want to use some of your Title I or Title IV funding for dual enrollment, that will be the function code 113. Remember, there are some stipulations. There are certain things that the districts have to do before they can use the funding in this way. But again, if you would like to, work with your consultant. Next slide, please. Summer school was a clarification we made last year. If you are doing summer school that is for everyone, you have a school-wide opportunity, grade-wide opportunities, things like that, we do want you to use the function code 119. If you happen to have a summer school that is for a very specific targeted group of students, just EL or just a handful of kids, you still will use function code 125, okay, as that compensatory education because you're not offering it to all. So even in a school-wide program, you could still possibly have a function code 125 if you are serving a targeted group of students. So please keep that in mind. This decision was made last year too about behavior needs. So many behavior needs are coming up. We have a lot of PBIS, restorative practices, behavior specialists, interventionists, a lot of climate and culture work going on, which is great. We got together as MDE and decided that we wanted to use function code 216 for any of those. In the past, function code 216 has been a social worker function code for the most part. But now, please, any behavior-related item or person or PD should be function code 216. Okay, next.
Shelley, not PD. PD is still 221.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Teachers.
Yeah, I apologize. Thank you. Okay, 219, function code 219 came into play more once we got Title IV money. We have that safe and healthy section of Title IV. And when MD was working on allowable function codes for Title IV, that came up. So more people have been asking about that. And if you look at the accounting code manual, that has to do with monitoring. So this could be allowable in Title I, especially in a school-wide school with a need, or Title IV with a health and safety need. So you could use this for some lunchroom, hallway, playground monitors and school resource officers if needed. Again, you would have to show how it meets the intent and purpose of the law, what the need is behind it, how you will monitor and implement that program, and whether or not it's going to make a difference in academic achievement. If you do have bus monitors, you still do need to use function code 271. That's for transportation. That's a little different. In the past, we were not allowed to use Title II funding for professional memberships. Now we can. If your professional membership will provide resources and additional resources and PD to members, then we can consider that professional development and we can use Title II money to pay for that membership. Now it could be a 221 for instructional staff, or it could be a 283 for administrative, coaching, other staff. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, this next administrative cost, if you go to the accounting code manual, you will see multiple administrative costs, function codes. They're not even all here. We're missing some. And if you look at the last column here, that's just kind of confusing where it says use only when transferring funds from 2 to 4. They got a little convoluted when we were trying to create help screens. You can just ignore that whole thing about funds from 2 to 4. Don't worry about that. Just know that there are multiple codes for administrative cost. It could be direct services, it could be audit services, it could be multiple things. Use your accounting code manual and remember that all of the funding sources have a limit on the percentage you can use for administrative cost. Okay, another thing, a couple things that are allowed in Title II. 1 is principal recruitment and 2 is teacher recruitment. They are allowable costs in Title II. If you are going to think about principal recruitment and retention or teacher recruitment and retention, you need to work with your consultant, and the consultant has to then work with the management team. It is not something that can be approved without management. If you are looking at principal recruitment and retention, that is a function code 241. If it's teacher recruitment and retention, that is a function code 283. There are some FAQs about this and some guidelines, but don't expect just because you put it in the budget that it's going to be approved. There has to be a lot of work done on this. Okay, go ahead to the next screen. Function code 297 is a newer function code that we've been encouraging people to use. And again, I think it came up when Title IV was added and new function codes were being discussed. If your LEA staff is actually preparing food for after-school snacks or after-school programs or before-school programs, not talking about the typical breakfast and lunch, but those additional snacks or meals that you may be serving due to a title or federal program, please use function code 297 when it's the LEA staff actually preparing and serving those snacks. If you are having an after-school program with Title I money and you're just going to Sam's Club and buying peanut butter crackers and juice boxes, that is still going to be whatever function code your program is under, which typically would be a 125. So please use function code 297 if your LEA staff is preparing food for a federal program, or a function code most likely 125 if you are just purchasing snacks to serve to kids. Function code 361 has been around for a long time. This has to do with welfare needs, and typically we see this with homeless students. This could be with foster students though, it could be with other students. Where it gets confusing is that if a homeless student needs certain things, okay, glasses, graduation caps and gowns, school supplies, any basic things, that could be a welfare need and would be under function code 361. However, if you have an academic program set up for homeless students or foster care students or any student for that matter, and you need school supplies for that, that's different, and then you're going to use a function code 125 because that's supporting the academic program. Those aren't academic supplies that are just going home with the child because they don't have a backpack or paper, pencil, things to have at home to work on their classwork at home. So there are two differences there. Private schools always will use a function code 371, even when you are talking about administrative costs that you may negotiate with your private schools. If you have a negotiated administrative cost for private schools, it will show up on a separate line in your budget, still a function code 371, but as an administrative cost. That gets a little tricky, and there is some new pieces on the worksheet that you will see, but please work with your consultant on that one so we can make sure we get that one straight. Okay, next. I think we have questions now.
So
And I
Sean
saw a lot of chats.
yeah, Sean had a couple of questions. I think he may have gotten the first one answered about summer programs. That also maybe credit recovery programs that were, was it going to be a 119 or a 125? I think Michelle answered that one. I think this is a question that probably might be on quite a few people's minds for the fall. If we're forced to remain in an online or distance or blended model, or students coming in just some part of the week but having to stay home the rest of the time of the week, does that change anything with the codes, or like what's the situation with
that model? Yeah, that model will not change the codes. Where the child is served does not change the codes. It's how and who is served. So is it a school-wide approach and would be served school-wide? That'd be 111, 112, 113. Or is this program only serving a handful? It's a 125. So function codes aren't going to change. It doesn't matter where they're served. It matters who is served and how they're served, in small group or as wholes. Does that make sense?
Sean, do you want to get on and maybe clarify that, or did that answer that for you? Oh, I saw that Sean just put it in the chat, so it looks like that clarified.
Okay.
But the only time it matters where is when you're ordering technology equipment.
And we're getting to that.
If the technology is for the classroom, then it's 125. But if it's for a computer lab or a program is for a computer lab, then it's 225.
Yeah, that's our next slide, actually. We'll go over that in a second.
I did have an example, a question from one of my districts the other day. They were talking about having their Title I person, I'm not sure full-time or part-time, change from a Title I instructor, but because the teachers needed so much help, the Title I person was now going to do more coaching. So that's the only thing that I can think of that where we might be looking at a change in function code, maybe.
Yeah, and that'd be because it's a change in job or a change in a cost objective. So that's different. Yep, true.
Yeah, but that would be if they were changing to a coach instead of a teacher. But that that really doesn't be due to because of the changes of the COVID. But anyway, yeah, it of course, as it would be what you would have been done anyway was if you were changing as Shelley said, if you were changing the role of the person, then the function code could change.
Okay. David, anything else in the chat?
It looks like Gail added just a short clarification on the recruitment and retention piece also, reasonable and customary amounts.
And I've heard that too, I've heard that is because many new teachers or changing teachers think, oh, here's a signing bonus of $3,000. They don't remember that is going to be taxed. So it's something that when you if you are thinking about a signing bonus, that you make that very clear, as you are offering that of course it's taxed. If you're a fiscal person, that's happening, but some of the new teachers or changing teachers may not be aware that it will be taxed.
Yeah. Okay, so I see a couple of people talking about inconsistencies with the consultants. You are correct. There are 20 of us, there are 5 teams, and we are working very hard in our office for consistency purposes. Before all of this happened, we had a very good process working where we were coming together and we had a consistency lead group, and we would work together as the 5 teams and come up with plans of action on how to consistently do lots of things in our office. So we are continuing that work. It just looks a little different right now. We were just, the last week, we've been going over our protocols for reviewing both the TIS and the consolidated application with the changes for consistency purposes. And one of the things that I'm actually working on right now, especially for those of you that have charter schools with management companies, is the consistencies for you, because you may have 20 schools in your management company and you might have 4 consultants, And those 4 consultants may be asking you for slightly different things, or sometimes drastically different things. I'll be very honest. I am trying to get together a group for each management company, and we're going to do a couple of applications together and try to be as consistent as possible when we're reviewing those applications. It will not be the end-all be-all. It will still not be perfect, but I do want you to know that we are working on that. And then, Sean, you had another question about a mental shortcut. Can you please unmute yourself and ask that question, and so I understand what you're asking?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so this is like another, I don't know, inconsistency between all the 20 consultants of sometimes a given thing, usually it's around the summer academy, a summer recovery program that we have. Like one of the positions, if it's all in the school level budget, that is fine. But then for someone else, it's like, oh, you got to move that out of there and put it in the district budget. But then
Okay, I
another
see what you're
consultant
saying.
will be like, you need to, you know, so like moving things around. And I'm like, I don't understand.
Okay.
As a single building district, I don't know why there's this difference between the two.
Yeah.
And there's no coherent like rationale
Yep.
for it. It's just like an annoyance
Okay.
to get things through. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I can try to address that. So there's a couple of things for that. When it comes to a single building district, overall, we are asking for the majority of your items or requests to be in your school level budget. That's what's supposed to be happening. The federal government and the lawyers that we work with have all said there should be as little as possible in the district level budget. There are some things that have to be in the district level budget, like the homeless set aside that's required, the if you have private schools, which charter schools don't, but this happens for other districts as well. And then occasionally, if you have a function, you know, an administrative function code, those are the things that should be there. In the past, we used to have things like summer school at the district level. But again, the federal government and the lawyers we work with have been asking us to get as many items in the school level budgets as possible. And there's also more flexibility in the school level budgets when it comes to Title I. So that's actually advantageous to all of you. So that's a good point, Sean, and I will make sure that's one of the points that we go over again as a group of 20 to ensure that we know exactly what should be in the district versus what should be in the school level budgets. But keep in mind, occasionally there will be exceptions to the rule because I can't get around that. But thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions in the chat?
I just had another example on that because when you think about that, you don't. But as a building principal, there were 2 buildings for summer school that were participating, so the money was being put into the district. The request was for the summer school in the district budget. But the one building principal only had, because of how far away it was from where the site they were having the district summer school, hardly anybody participated from that school. But the other school had the majority of the students. And so it was inequitable to take off the top for the district's budget in that case. So if you were the principal of the building, you know, oh, my kids aren't, you know, that money's being taken away off the top, that's the district budget, and my kids are hardly benefiting. So there's circumstances like that come up that it should go back to this school budget because it would be more equitable in the amount of money per child. So it's circumstances like that you know, may not be the way most people do it, but some, again, unique circumstances, like Shelley said. So I just wanted to clarify that for some people to understand why there are unique. Some people can put it in their district, some people can't.
Yeah. Okay, David, if you want to go to the next slide, we can keep moving. So these are the technology function codes that Michelle was mentioning. We just clarified that this year. So technology, again, many of us are purchasing new technology and different technology. So if you have a basic program and across your classrooms or now with your distance learning, You're going to be providing, say, one-to-one devices or grade level computer carts when they get back into the classroom, computer stations in the classrooms, and even the software that goes with that. Those would be the function code 111, 112, and 113. If you are purchasing hardware or software technology for a compensatory education programs, those added needs or identified populations could be in the classroom. It could now be even, right now, everybody needs computers at home. So that one probably be the computer at home, but the specialized programs that you may use at home, that's going to be a 125. So as your kids are learning distantly, they might have an additional program to close those gaps for them. Again, once we get back into schools, if you have a computer lab, it's a dedicated lab. It's all computers all the time. Different staff sign it out for different projects. That is going to be a function code 225. And many of you now will be seeking some money probably for repairs, right? And if you have tablets or laptops or desktops and you need repairs and setup and things like that, that's either classrooms or labs. That's going to be a function code 261. Okay, so you can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so again, last year we started to do some work with professional learning. These function codes have kind of moved around in the 10 years I've been here. At first we were asked to use it one way, then another. Now I think we're kind of going back, you know, how history repeats itself. But what's very important here is this number one, the position or role of the recipient of the professional learning determines the function code for the professional learning. That was where people got a bit confused. Function code 221 is for instructional staff. So includes personnel that deliver activities directly to you're teaching the people. So teachers, paraprofessionals, things like that. Function code 283 is personnel that provides administrative or technical and logistical support. This also includes coaches, because coaches aren't directly teaching kids, coaches are coaching teachers. So your state and federal programs person, your coaches, people such as that will use a function code 283. If you want to go to the next slide. So this slide has to do with sometimes professional development. If you bring someone into your district, you'll have a single charged professional development. So if you have that single charged professional development, you can use the function code that fits the majority of the staff. So if 80% of your staff receiving that professional development was instructional, then I would use a 221. If 80% was non-instructional or support staff, I would use a 283. If you do get itemized charges for professional development, please separate them appropriately. So you may end up having multiple line items for one professional development. You might have a 221 for that same professional development that you have a 283. Okay.
Kelly, we did have a couple function, if that was the end of function codes.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and answer the function
There were a
code
couple of
questions.
function code ones.
Yep.
One question was about the use of function code 284, which I think
Yep, I was
is
just
like infrastructure or something like technology infrastructure.
So I'm looking at the accounting code manual right now. For 284, it says non-instructional technology services. Activities concerned with supporting the school's district information technology system, including supporting administrative networks, maintaining administrative information systems, and processing data for administrative and managerial. Okay, I would imagine a 284 would be allowed, but I would also imagine that that's going to go towards your administrative cost limit, which in Title I, remember, is up to 10%, which includes your indirect cost. So I'm not going to say you can't use it. I'm just going to say it's an administrative cost and would fall into that administrative cap. Does that make sense?
The other question that we had here was, are these, all the discussions we're having about the function codes today, is that going to consistently apply to the ESSER funds?
That is the hope. However, many of you know that our office is not the ones reviewing your applications. We wanted to review your applications because we feel like we know you and that you know us and know the expectations. We have given them, as an office, we have given them the same information we use, and the hope is they will be using the same guidelines. We are willing to help you in any way with the ESSER application so that we can get it as approvable for you as possible, but we are not the ones reviewing it.
A question that came up was, is there a list of function codes that would count against administrative costs, or is that too dependent on the situation?
I'll have to email me that question, whoever this is. I'm Patton M. Trying to remember if we, at one point, we did pull together a list of administrative cost function codes. I will have to find that and get it out to everyone. Anything else in the chat?
One other thing, Shelley, it's administrative costs in the district budget that you might want to clarify.
You talk about the 10% limit?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Occasionally there'll be some administrative costs at a school level, but that's very rare. And if you have that, you'll need to work with your consultant. Okay, well, let's keep moving here. Also in the consolidated application, last year, you know, we made a change to the participation of private schools screen. Those of you that don't serve private schools, you have a quick, easy checkbox. Those of you that are charter schools, public school academies, this screen doesn't even show up for you, which is nice. You don't even have to check a box. But this year we did update the calculation worksheet. There are definitely some changes made to that calculation worksheet. It is on our website right now. Do not use the old worksheet. It will be incorrect. And what I have told my districts is talk to me after you think the calculation worksheet is done, because if you do that incorrectly, it will mess up your TIS, which then messes up your application, and then everything has to go back. So if you complete your calculation worksheet, I would recommend you talk to your consultant and work through that with them so they can make sure that all your numbers are correct and that you're pulling things from where you need to pull them. So that way when you complete your TIS, which then feeds into your consolidated app, everything is correct. Okay. One of the additions to that calculations worksheet has to do with Title III. There is now a Title III tab. Okay. It is the district's responsibility to work with the private schools to locate both EL and immigrant students within the private schools. There is a section in MSDS where those kids are actually noted, and those students, even though they're at the private school, do increase the allocation that can come to your district or our state, and then you are responsible to serve them at that private school. This is new for a lot of people. We've not been doing this correctly in the past, so we're trying to help you do it correctly moving forward. Kelly Alvarez is the Title III consultant. Her information is in the contact info at the end. She can help with this as well, or your consultant can help you with this. The other thing that was added to the calculations worksheet is a delineation between indirect cost or direct administrative cost in your private schools. I'm not going to go into all this. You'll see the directions in the worksheet. It is a bit complicated, but once you work through it once, I've done it a couple times now, it makes sense. Just follow the directions, work with your consultant, and you will understand what I'm talking about here. But there is an error check if you make an error there. There is some additional support for taking indirect costs on the Title I private school amounts. There's some more information there, some more direction to you, for you, to help with that. Now, I know at least my districts, I have been working very hard the last couple of years, reviewing the final expenditure reports, paying very close attention to private school carryover, and working with my districts. It's been made very clear to us by our management and the federal government that all carryover for private schools needs to go back to the private schools. Now, in the past, there has been some language out there like, well, whose fault was it? Was it your fault as the district because you dilly-dallied and didn't get them the money? Or was it the private school's fault? At this point, especially because of everything going on now, if there is carryover for the private schools, it goes back to the private schools. If you have a very extenuating circumstance, you need to work with your consultant, and we will work with management to determine where that carryover should go. In the past, many people just kept that carryover in the LEA budget. There is a carryover tab on this Equitable Services worksheet, and it must be utilized at amendment time. And occasionally earlier if you have early carryover, which that's a whole nother business. But something to consider here that we didn't say yesterday or earlier, and I think I even forgot this at the other one. If you have a skipped school, so if you have a title eligible building, often you have a high school that's a title eligible building, and you skip that school and choose to use 31A money, you must still count those private school kids that attend that building. So if you skipped a high school, so you should be serving your high school because they're over 75%, and you work with a private school that has high school age students, you must still collect the high school data, and it must be entered into the Equitable Services worksheet, and those kids must still be served with that Title I money. That Title I money comes off the top before you even distribute to your schools. That's another complicated one, but you need to work with your consultants to ensure that's happening. Okay, we can go on to the next one. The budget screens. Just like in the past, the budgets will pull forward. We do expect that you look at all budget items and make any adjustments, which we're assuming this year you'll have quite a few adjustments. Don't forget that Title IV does have a cap of 2% for administrative cost, but what's nice, what we did add is a primary use of funds for administrative costs in Title IV. We didn't have that before, and we had to have a workaround for those of you that did take administrative costs out of Title IV. It is now an actual drop down. You can pick administrative costs as a primary use, but it's still limited to the 2%. Okay, you can go to the next screen. For those of you that do receive Title V, there is a change this year. It's not a lot of you, but there will be a primary use of funds field. So remember, Title V can be used like any other funding source, 1, 2, 3, 4, or even parent involvement activities. So you will build your budget by selecting the function code, and then you will next go to primary use of funds. So you will pick the primary use of funds that best fits the way in which you are using that Title V money. Now, the one error check that's built in here is if you pick parent involvement activities, but you didn't pick function code 331, it will give you an error. It's completely allowable to pick parent involvement activities, but of course it needs to be function code 331. Okay, next. The next one is about the errors that are built in now to Title II and Title IV. So you can transfer Title II or Title IV to any other funding source, including Title I. So the first thing I want to say about this is if you transfer from 2 or 4 to Title I, you must create school level budgets in Title II and IV. There are still many districts that are confused about transfer. When we're saying transfer, what we really mean is that you're using the money like another funding source. The money itself does not move. Our cash management system does not allow that. It doesn't support that. So some people think that if I'm transferring Title II to Title I, that my Title II money moved to Title I in cash management. That is not true. It stays in Title II, therefore has to be drawn down in the ways approved in Title II. Same thing for Title IV. So the other tricky part is, remember you're doing your equitable services worksheet for private schools first. You consult with your private schools about transferring. Ultimately, it's the district's yay or nay, but you have to have that consultation with the private schools. In the end, the decision is made. That gets reflected on the equitable services worksheet, and all the final allocations will show up on the worksheet. If you transfer all of your 4, say to 1, nothing will show up in Title IV for your private schools. It will be a blank column. Their Title I will increase. If they didn't receive Title I, they get nothing. So that's where the problems can come into play. But that worksheet is done first. In the end, if you moved all of your 4 to 1, all of the private school services will show up in Title I. So what I'm trying to say here is private school services will show up in the funds that they were transferred to. Not from, but to. Again, that one can get a little tricky. We started working on this the last year or so. Work with your consultant to make sure you have those private school funds in the correct funding source. Okay, I think we have questions now.
So it looks like one question that came up since our last question break, this was in regard to the Title III, if you're in a Title III consortium.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And so Pam said, speak to the Title III obligation in relation to the Title III consortium.
Perfect, thank you. That's a great question. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. If you are part of a Title III consortium, you won't do anything on the equitable worksheet for Title III. The consortium lead will handle that. Only those of you that receive your own Title III money directly to your LEA will have to do that Title III tab. If you're in a consortium, the consortium lead will handle that. Don't forget though, immigrant is always going to go to the LEA. Immigrant funding no longer has a consortium option. Anything else in the chat?
I'm not seeing anything else pop up.
Okay. All right, we can move on. All right, we're gonna take a quick 10-minute break. Everybody can stretch and get their new cup of coffee. And David, would you like to set a timer?
Yep, I'll put a timer up.
Okay, for special populations, the first section is 31A updates. So first, briefly, the intent and purpose of 31A. We can go to the next slide, David. As I was saying, the intent and purpose basically is to provide instruction and direct non-instructional support services to students to achieve regular attendance, ELA proficiency by the end of grade 3, math proficiency by the end of grade 8, and career and college readiness by the end of grade 11. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see what the assurances are. So if you do decide to utilize your Section 31A funding, you must adhere to these 3 assurances: that you will implement a model of MTSS K-12 for all grades that you operate, that the MTSS model must address literacy, numeracy, and comply with the Read by Grade 3 law. And remember that the legislation was condensed to reflect the 5 essential components that support a fidelity model of implementation for MTSS in our state. Now, some of the changes that went into effect October 1st, 2019 are going to be highlighted next. So David, can you go to the next slide, please? First, in the area of accountability and redirection, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 fiscal consequence of not meeting the specific academic targets was removed from the law. However, this consequence may have been removed, but remember that the overall intent and purpose for these categorical funds has not changed. So the funds, the purpose remains focused on the 3rd grade reading, 8th grade math, college and career readiness in 8th grade, and reducing chronic absenteeism. In the area of professional development, it increased from 5% to 7.5% of your total allocation. You can use this for professional development if it's research-based and implement it, or you're implementing a coaching model that supports a multi-tiered system of supports frameworks. The professional development must be aligned to State of Michigan professional learning standards and integrated into your district, school, and classroom practices. It must also be solely related to the implementation of MTSS and early literacy and the Read by Grade 3 law for leaders, teachers, interventionists, and instructional coaches. Okay, you can move on to the next screen. So in these next areas that I'm going to talk about, I want you to make sure that you understand what your specific student populations are in your district, your educationally disadvantaged and your at-risk students. It's good for you to know these percentages before you start working on your 31A. And remember that educationally disadvantaged is a subset of the at-risk population. So in the area of school security, in order to use 31A funds for school security, you must have at least 50% of your students that were determined economically disadvantaged. And if you have this and you want to use these funds for school security, you can only use up to 20% of your total allocation and no more. So in the area of school breakfast, districts should plan at the beginning of the school year to use some 31A funds for school breakfast supplements. So schools that meet the qualifications of 20% or more economically disadvantaged, you must serve school breakfast. Therefore, Section 31A must be utilized from a penny to $10 per pupil to fund school breakfast programs. In the area of school-wide reform, remember that this is by building and not by LEA. So a building must have at least 40% of at-risk eligible students in order to utilize Section 31A funds on a school-wide reform. A district or public school academy may use Section 31A funds it receives under this section to implement Tier 1 evidence-based practices in school-wide reforms. Again, this is new language as of October 1st, 2019. Instructional and non-instructional service, again, must be aligned with what is indicated in the school improvement plan or the district improvement plan, along with your comprehensive needs assessment. Another change in this area is that for school-wide reforms, they must include parent and community supports, activities, and services, which may include pathways to potential programs created by DHHS. Okay, we can move on to the next screen. Now, for those of you that get Title 1A Part D or Title I Part A neglected funds, these are for youth who are delinquent and neglected in state facilities. So you would be working with your state facilities in your area. Prior to last year, we did not have those estimated allocations available. Last year was the first year that we did have those estimated allocations for you before school started. So we gave you some flexibility in when you submitted those grants. This year, now that we're moving into the second year with estimated allocations in Title 1D and Title 1A neglected, we do expect that those are to be submitted with the July 1st obligation, if you want your obligation date for July 1st. So it's important that you are collaborating with your facilities so that you can get those grants submitted on time. We do not want to see a lack of federal programming because you didn't submit these on time. So if you have any questions about Title 1D or Title 1A neglected, you can either ask your regional consultant or contact Dawn Carmody, who is our MDE consultant for this area, and her information will be listed on the back of this PowerPoint. Okay, on to the next screen. For our language assistance program screen, this has been moved in and out of MEGS Plus, and it was put back in again last year, and it's in again this year. So just briefly, the language assistance program was first recognized in a court case, Law versus Nichols, where the court ruled that the district must take affirmative steps to overcome educational barriers faced by non-English speaking students. And this has become case law and is now applicable for all English language learner students. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and Michigan State's Civil Rights Law, Elliott versus Larson, also require this equal access. So any district that receives any state or federal funding must comply with this requirement to support their English learner students. You must provide them with meaningful access to the core curriculum and also provide them with a direct instruction in language development. The Language Assistance Program screen in the Consolidated Application will help us as consultants understand how each of you are meeting these expectations using general education funds. And I want to emphasize that it is with general education funds, not 31A, not Section 41 or Title III. It goes beyond what the regular education teacher provides, and it's still with general education funds, and I'll explain that a little more. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, all of your information from last year will be pulled over to the screen this year. So it'll be important that you review that, you look at that, update it, revise it, whatever you need to do. And then up in the upper right-hand corner, you see that box, and you'll need to, it's a drop-down box, you'll need to verify that you have in fact done that by checking yes. Move on to the next slide. Okay, this is where we get in some detail with the lab. The lab template is used to demonstrate what you're doing with your general education funds for Tier 1 supports, and how in two different areas. First of all, how are you providing English language development to your English learners? And to be clear, you must have a certified teacher that also holds an endorsement in ESL or bilingual endorsement that is providing this English language development. Just having a bilingual parapro does not meet this criteria. If you don't have a certified teacher doing this, then you need to let us know what your plan is to eventually hire one. The second area is you need to demonstrate how you're providing meaningful access to the core curriculum for all English learners. So this could be done by if the general education teachers are using SIOP strategies during math, science, ELA, but it can also be demonstrated by providing a trained paraprofessional that supports students during this class time. But you can't use a paraprofessional unless you have met the requirement of the first in English language development with a certified bilingual or ESL endorsed teacher. So in the lab description, we're looking for an intentionally planned program of supports that supports students in these two critical areas. More support should be provided at earlier levels of proficiency, and support should diminish as proficiency levels increase. And remember, this is in addition to whatever MTSS support you might already have in your district. So, if you decide as a district to also apply for Title III and Section 41 funds, please remember that you already have to have in place these two components that I just discussed. Then you can add additional services with Title III or Section 41. Also on the lab, remember you can also delineate between elementary or secondary if you need to, and if your services look different at those levels, and sometimes they do. So you can just very easily label them as elementary and secondary. A little earlier in the chat box, I gave you the English language toolbox. In fact, I did it 3 times by mistake, but it's there, and I'll put it in there again if you need it. So that's it for the lab. We can move on to the next screen. Section 41. Okay, Section 41 are state funds for English learners. Remember, when you hear title, that's federal. If you hear state or section, that's state funds. So Section 41 are state funds for English learners. And last year we received quite a significant increase. And I just wanted to remind everybody that those reports, Section 41 reports, are due in MEGS Plus on July 15th, 2020. So upcoming July here, your Section 41 reports are due. The description of the evaluation is optional. And also many districts most likely will have unspent funds since we have finished the school year at home. So if this is the case for you, please create a plan to spend those additional funds, formatted like the MEGS Plus budget, and then attach that spending plan to this year's budget, to your 2021 budget. Okay, now we'll stop for any questions we may have on this section.
Pam had a question about a comment that had been made earlier by Gail. I don't know if you want to just look in the chat to see what that is, or it's kind of long.
Is that the one Pam Turner had, David?
Yep.
Okay, so talking about administrative cost, and keep in mind the 10%, let's talk about Title I, the 10% limit of administrative cost are those costs that show up in the district level budget. So things like audits or function code 226 for oversights of the program. There's a whole list, I did put it in the chat, of the majority of the function codes allowable for administrative. However, if you're in a school level budget and you have a school-wide school and your principal needs to go to a professional learning the same as your teachers so that they're on the same page, that does not, even though it's a function code 283, that will not be administrative cost. Now, some districts will pull some money off the top to send some administrators to like MASFPS or some things like that, and they put those in the district level budget. Those function code 283s do count towards the administrative cost. So it has to do with who's being served and where it is in the budget. So if you're confused by that, just go ahead and work with your consultant on that.
Also, we do have one of our 31A consultants available. I believe she's still on this presentation if anybody has any specific questions about 31A. I think Joan is still with us.
I am here, yes.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
So, question about when the recording would be available. I'm recording this right now, so somehow I would have to get that to you guys, and I don't know where and how you post those sorts of things. Any details on that?
Can we add it to the bit.ly when it's done? Because won't they still have access to the bit.ly?
They will. It just usually needs to be hosted somewhere, like on a YouTube or something like that.
Oh.
I suppose I could just, well, we can work out those details later. It is being recorded. There are not many layers if we're just going to throw it into a drive someplace. But
Okay, we'll talk about that.
okay.
And then we'll, all of us consultants will send you an email, our assigned districts an email where you can find that recording.
I don't believe there are any other questions that have not already been answered.
Okay, we ready to go on to the next section? Private schools? Gail?
Yes, this is Gail speaking again on the private school. The first part is really, I think there used to be another screen last year on this, which explained that by May 1st, or the first week of May, I think we usually say, you should have had your letter of invitation to the private schools out for the consolidated application. You do this every year by the first week of May. This is different than what we talked about for ESSER, okay? ESSER is another letter or notification that you have had to make. Many of you start and send your letters of invitation for the consolidated application back in, I think, February. I think I've seen them as early as February into January, March. So most of you probably have that letter of invitation done already. But if you don't, you need to do that. You are allowed to use last year's letter and just update it. Just, update and include Title III if you haven't already included Title III last year. So make sure that, the letter's out so that you can, you're ready and you know who you're going to consult with, who wants to consult with you. If you're not familiar with the EEM geographical search, that you can type in your school address and 30 miles and address, and that geographical, you just EEM geographical search in the area, and it will use that instrument. It's very, very helpful. So you make sure you're not missing any private school that you should be inviting. All right, so this really starts then is ongoing consultation. So you will be meeting with, and it's not like it used to be. It used to be you met one time with the private school and you discussed how those students, if they were eligible, and if they how you were going to serve them and the amount of money. So no, it's much more complicated now, but I think very helpful to everybody. So you know what you're doing. The LEA knows what they're doing. Everybody's has more time for discussion. So this slide, talks about the different times of year or different things that are happening. You may need to have a consultation. You may do it by phone or email, but just make sure it doesn't have to be face-to-face, of course, but just record when you are meeting and the sample agenda. We are not at this time having you post the at 1 year. I think it was just 1 year we asked you to post the consultation forms. But you must have them available if asked or things need to be clarified with the private school. Fred Williams continues to be the ombudsman at the state level, interim position. So he gets calls and he may, call you if there's a problem, and he would expect to see those records, or if there's an on-site review, those records might be asked for also. Next screen, please. Okay, and these are some of the things, again, for meaningful consultation. There is a whole screen on private school consultation with Title I. So some of these and other documents are listed there on our website. If you need, again, as always, if you're confused or you might have skipped a step, please call your consultant, and we'll go over it with you because there are quite a few steps. The first one is, providing the numbers of the free and reduced students and their residential areas. There's total student population numbers for Title II. So LEAs will provide estimated allocations, and that's something that you can discuss and have prepared so that you are ready to know how much, so that the private schools know how much money they will have, how much funding they will have to assist their students, and you know how much has to be allocated when you're developing this part of the TIS and the Consolidated Application, and how it affects your budgets and what you will have to spend. It's really hard to go back and a private school tells you in July or August, it's all based on the year before, so it's not like new students coming in. We don't have to worry about that. But that they forgot, or a new principal comes in or something and wants to participate. You need to put in a deadline in your original letters of invitation to participate, a deadline. Again, send out the 2 attempts so that everybody's clear. Because it is not a fun process to go back and have to redo all your budgets because you forgot to include private school students. Again, it's a real time to discuss everything, ask questions, think about what the process is. What's the best thing for kids? One of our managers always used to say, what's the best thing going to be for the kids? It's not, shouldn't be one side and the other fighting. It's more about collaborating, consultation for best services for students. Okay, next slide. As I said, it should be ongoing, not just one meeting. Real important to double check all this time at amendment time. If you have more money, more funding, then you need to revise your equitable school, private school worksheet, put in the new numbers, include the carryover so you can be prepared for additional services. That would be great. It does require you to revise some things though, including the tests. If it's the LEA's responsibility, it's your responsibility. We don't have any private school people, I don't believe here today, but excuse me, that there's ongoing monitoring of the program. So again, in the days when you met once, the private schools kind of felt like they were on their own, and if they made mistakes, you didn't find out about it until later. And that is just not a good process. So again, as the previous graph described, meet often and discuss phone calls, emails, and keep those documentation, keep that documentation. How the students will be identified based on the results of their comprehensive needs assessment and the school improvement plan. The private schools still need to have a comprehensive needs assessment, and they also need to be able to tell you how they identified the students and what their needs were, so that whoever has decided the intervention that they will receive, you have that information to begin services. And how you'll assess it, and how's it going. And sometimes I hear stories of, oh, that teacher dropped out, or we couldn't find anybody else, so here's all this money left over. Well, again, the ombudsman would view that as partly the responsibility of the LEA, should have also known about that. Both parties should have been consulting so that the students continue to receive services. That's just an example. And then there's also the dispute resolution procedures with the private school. That, again, there is a process. If there, of course, we hope that during the consultation process that solves 99% of any issues, but there is a procedure that we follow if, and all of you follow, if there is a problem that is not solved easily. And again, that's what we have an ombudsman for at the state. And also local consultants can try to help you with that. Next slide, please. Okay, any questions? I didn't see any pop up, but are there any other questions on private schools? Thank you. And then it's Michael. Michael, are you ready?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. So you should be able to see me. I did start my video. So I wanted to actually, you saw the fiscal updates was our first page. And originally when I put the slides together, I was titled my presentation, Understanding and Surviving a Fiscal Review. So my hope is that I can share some knowledge with you that maybe some light bulbs will go off and you'll be able to better understand what to expect when you get a phone call from either myself or Bill Anderson, Michael Wynn, or Christy Van Steenberg. So the first slide here, as you can see, is the whole concept of really the consolidated application requires input from a lot of different sources, as you probably all know by now. I guess one of the things in my limited experience of doing this job, as I've been in the department for about 9 months, is really when you go to set up your budget, that can really eliminate a lot of potential problems down the road if it's done correctly. And so therefore draw your attention to the accounting code manual and see how it correlates to the layout of the consolidated application. Had a lot of discussion on function codes already, and that of course corresponds to the particular line item that you're seeking approval for. And in terms of the coding structure of the process, you know, there's about 7 shall we say columns, I guess you will, in your coding structure. And really when I or Mike or Bill or Christy come out, we're mainly looking at the columns 3 through 7, with the first one being the function code, the next one being the object code, which correlates to either whether or not it's salaries, benefits, purchase services, or materials and supplies, or other, in the case of if you're have indirect. And so if, for example, if you have purchase services, you know, the object code is going to be 3 or 4,000 code, and that's going to correlate with the particular column in the consolidated app. And then of course you'll have your program. The next one would be the particular grant, and then the last one that we are generally looking at is what facility or school is this being charged to. And that will generally be used for when the way the consolidated app is put together with the budgets, whether it be at the ISD or district level or the building level. So next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the things when we come out, what we're concerned with is internal controls. And pursuant to Section 303 and the Universal Grant Guidance, you are required to have an effective internal control over the federal award that provides reasonable assurance that you're managing it in compliance with the federal statutes, regulations, and terms and conditions of the award. And you can get some insight as to the standards for these internal controls, which is the standards for internal controls in the federal government, which is issued by the Comptroller General. Or there's another one, the Internal Control Integrated Framework, which is issued by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. So when we come out and we're looking at internal controls, there's going to be a few areas that we're going to come out and we're going to ask for your policies and procedures. And if you want to go on to the next slide, what we're looking for is allowability of cost, which we'll be touching on. And I apologize for not having a slide here listing all those when we're starting this section. But allowability of costs, conflicts of interest, procurement, within procurement, technical evaluations, which is nothing more than we're really looking to see how you handle your biddings, and then travel reimbursement. But the first thing that we're going to be looking for is your cash management. And so we're basically looking for the fact of whether or not they're going to be supported by the general ledger. So we recommend that when you go to get a disbursement from the grant, that maybe you print off the general ledger with the, let's say, year-to-date expenditures for your first one, so that you have some support for what you're requesting for a disbursement. We want to make sure with these cash management policy that person requesting the funds should not be the person receiving the funds. We understand that smaller offices might not necessarily be able to do this. If you could have some sort of procedure set up where disbursements, for example, and all the supporting documentation is approved by, say, the superintendent. So there are ways around that if you have a small office. Next, please. Okay. So as I said, we want to make sure that costs are allowable, and in that we want to make sure that they're reasonable. So we don't expect that any of the, say, coaches or whatever are getting paid Miguel Cabrera wages, and we want to make sure that it's necessary, which it should be, to carry out the whole idea of what we're doing this program for. We want to make sure that it's allocable, in that it's for the right grant. It's within the obligation period. One of the things you're going to have to, for it to be allowable, you want the time and effort documentation, and we'll delve into that more so as we go along. And the most important thing is we want to make sure that it's approved in the consolidated application. As far as conflicts of interest go, we're going to make sure that it's documented somewhere as to the relationships of key personnel within the district and in the buildings. And as you can see, one of the last bullet points was that we recommend that staff not be supervised by family member or partner. That probably goes without saying, but we want to make sure that all these potential scenarios are documented Next slide, please. And then as far as procurement goes, just want to make sure that before you buy anything that it is included in the consolidated application. We're going to look to see that it's been signed for when it's received. We want to make sure there's proper approvals for all the costs. Purchase orders are always a nice thing to have. And we want to make sure that these expenditures are occurring within the allowable dates of the grant. And one of the things too is we want to make sure is when you are bidding things that, you know, there's more than one bid, shall we say, for whatever it happens to be that you're looking for. Next, please. So as you can see, some things to make sure is that the expenditures occurring within that period, the obligation period, and it's going to benefit the students in the program year. Just say that, you know, they must be educational in nature. For example, say a field trip to the zoo would be an acceptable purchase, but maybe taking the kids out for ice cream maybe wouldn't. Okay, next one, please. And travel reimbursement, one of the big things is that you know, we need to see the hotel receipts. Reservation confirmation is not going to be sufficient. So we have to make sure that the expenditure was actually made and for which the person actually received services. That's why we need to. Reservation confirmation is not going to be acceptable documentation. Next, please. Okay, now as I said, we were going to talk a little bit about cash management, and that's really where we get into the internal control, but this is really where we get into the disbursements. And we just want to make sure that, again, you're having the documentation supports the amount of money you're requesting. That's where we recommend that you maybe print off the general ledger summary. For example, your first one would be the year-to-date expenditures. And then there's going to be a date range for any additional ones. So to make sure you're not doubling up on any kind of expenditures that were made. That's really all I have to say about that. But as you know, it's probably all the expenditures are on a reimbursement basis. Next, please. Hopefully we don't need to take any questions yet at this point.
Mike, I just wanted to add, since we're here, on those hotel receipts, we just have to make sure everyone knows to get a zero balance, because we have a lot of people prepaying, especially now. And what we see is we get receipts that are not zeroed out. So if you pay somebody paying for 3 days, we want to make sure that they actually was there for 3 days.
Thanks, Mike. Mike's one of our fiscal monitors, and he's serving as one of my lifelines here if need be, to get some help. Mike has worked for MDE for about 10 years, I believe it was, and he's retired and now working on a contractual basis as a fiscal monitor, but he's got over 30 years of auditing experience as well. And, well, I shouldn't say as well, because I don't. Mine's only about 20. So, so thanks again, Mike. Feel free to chime in anytime you feel as though you have some good information to share.
Yep.
So I guess if there's nothing else anybody wants to add or question, we can move on. So first thing we look at is with the budgets, and you know, your district budget should not be different than the consolidated application. So therefore, that's when I was speaking a little bit, referred to the accounting coding manual. And that's where they should really mirror each other. So, you know, whatever the function code is where it's approved, you know, that's where you should be, that's the function code you should be using in your general ledger. Your object code should correspond with which column in the consolidated app it is, whether it be salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies and materials, or other. One of the things I've noticed is sometimes the business managers get they'll make errors in terms of whether or not the employee is a direct hire, for which then their salaries and benefits are going to be, those columns will be populated. However, if it's an instance where they're a contractor, they're going to be put into the object code of a 3 or a 4 for a purchase service. And in those cases, that's where you're probably going to end up sending that contractor either a 1099 if you paid them more than $600, or if you've received an I-9 from whoever they're working for, say the edu staff or something like that, then you wouldn't have to send them a 1099 because you're actually paying a corporation. So whereas if they're a W-2 employee and they're direct, that's where their expenditures are going to be booked in either the salaries or the benefits columns. You know, and probably one of the more common deficiencies is when there's overspending, and it is permissible to spend 10% of the item amount in addition to what's approved. Therefore, 110% of the approved expenditure would be permissible. Anything above the 110% would be recognized as a question cost, where in the state we would recapture that money, and then you would have to replenish with the carryover. Next slide, please. As far as staffing goes, the things that we look for is the person appropriately placed. It used to be highly qualified, and ensuring that what we're looking for is, you know, a current teaching certificate, or 60 credit hours at a community college or college. There's the MTTC test, which has replaced the word keys. Those are the things that we look for. Also, a background check is required, understandably so. And if that's a contracted person, please make sure that the entity that is providing your personnel has somewhere stipulated in the contract that background check has been done on the person. So that's what I would, that will allow you to be in compliance for staffing requirements. Next slide. Again, you know, background checks are required, and they have to be appropriately placed. That's where you get into whether or not they have the associate's degree, completion of 60 hours, or passage of the MTTC test, which used to be the work keys. Next slide. And time and effort. So this is usually requires, or where we have most of our findings, I think, in the payroll area. The PARS-like or semi-certifications, which you may or may not be familiar with, are not specifically required, but all the contents that are in those documents, which you may or may not have been using, we would recommend, if you're using them, to continue using them, because all of the information that is required to be in compliance is included on those documents. So if that's what you're using, we encourage you to keep using them. Next, please.
Michael, this is Shelley. Can I say something here? Sorry, we did this with Christy on the other
Yep.
one too. When you guys are looking for a specific time and effort, you're looking for something slightly different than what we look for when we go in for an on-site review. So I just want districts to be clear that just sharing a semi-cert or just sharing a schedule of a para is not enough for the program review. The program review is a little more in depth, and there needs to be activity logs that are filled out after the fact, after they've done the work, so that we can assure a couple of things. One, that they're doing things that are allowable or meeting the intent and purpose of whatever law they're being paid from. And two, that they have an accurate list of who is serving which children in which areas, so that they can evaluate and adjust those programs as needed. So when you have a fiscal audit, fiscal auditors will look for certain things, but on a program audit, we will look for a bit more. So if you have questions about that, please contact your consultant. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, in respect to also those PARs are after the fact. Activities in that information will help as long as it is summarized, it's on a PAR. But after the fact, actual documentation, lesson plans are not allowable as a PAR or certification. They have to be after the fact. The lesson plans or schedules are just what they are. Their schedules are lesson plans. They have to actually show the actual hours. So we do, in regards to what Michelle said, we take a close look at actual costs. We have some instances where they will give us everything, but they have summarized it on a PAR. So, and there's other ways to certify, which Mike was talking about certification. The PARs are the best. Semi-annual certs and PARs are the best things to use in time and effort right now, but you can certify with time cards with the same information if it alludes to the hours that a person is spending that day. Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so in terms of payroll, seems like a deficiency when we do find them are that the personnel has not been approved in the application. And another deficiency is that that we find sometimes is although the salary amount charged is within the amount approved in the application, sometimes the total benefits charged are more than 10% above the approved amount. So then that would potentially create some question costs. I guess there are some times when I've seen where the ratio of the total benefits to salaries for any one particular person might be different from what the total is for the amount of people that are being paid on the federal or through the consolidated app, and in which case we have had to make some adjustments in that. So, next one, please. In terms of general expenditures, when we first come out to see you, we ask for the detail general ledgers, in which case that's where we draw our samples from of the general expenditures, and then the most common deficiency we'll find is that that particular expense might not have been approved in the application. Another another things we find in the general expenditures is it will be booked in the wrong object code. It maybe should have gone into supplies and materials, but it might be under purchase services or vice versa. And in which case that becomes a misclassification where we basically give you a little slap on the wrist, tell you you made an error, and then that creates a situation where then we have to come out the following year and make sure that you've corrected those errors. Next, please. Next one is for purchase services. This is where we're going to want to see the contracts that you'll have. And in those contracts, we would like to see certain things such as make sure both parties have signed, make sure the scope of services is detailed and understandable, make sure the compensation is well defined, the termination provisions are included, and the duration of the contract is defined. For some of our purchases, we have allowed, like such as subscriptions, just a purchase order may suffice. Next, please. And then comes your federal expenditure report, which is due November 29th every year. And this is where this should be exactly the same as how you have things booked in your general ledger. When there are errors here, they're called variances. And again, that's just another small error that the LEA has done where we, again, just admonish you and let you know that we're going to be coming out next year again to look at your FER and making sure that everything is in order. So with that, I guess if there's any other questions, oh, okay, there is equipment. One of the things is we would like to see the inventory listing, and in that inventory listing, for which if you ever needed a good example, you can just contact one of the fiscal monitors and they can get you a template. And in that inventory listing, we want to see that when the date purchase of the item, their description, the cost, the location where it's being used, and some sort of numbering system. Serial number is not really required, but it does help to identify the item because we will be doing a physical inspection to make sure that the items are in existence and they're being used in the buildings properly. It's not required that you do an inventory every year. It's only due every other year, but we recommend you just do it once a year just to make sure that there are no errors, and it's just something that's probably easier done on an annual basis. So with that, unless there's questions, thank you for your time.
So there was a question from Chris. I'll just read it verbatim, or you can look at it in the chat. If the district budget should not be different than the CA, even if the district knows it will not spend all of its funds, how can we comply with the treasury requirements not to overstate total revenues? So Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, you know, the budget is always a good starting point, and it should mirror what's in the consolidated application. If you know ahead of time that you're going to be overspending on a particular line item, the best thing to do is just call your consultant and get approval for it in writing from them in an email. So when we come out and we find that you have overspent, we'll allow it.
Yeah, no, if I can just chime in on that, guys, it might be easier. What I'm talking about there is, let's say my my allocation for Title I is $400,000, and I know I'm only going to spend, $350,000 of it, or Title II maybe because of the 15% carryover. Regardless, in the interest of not overstating my revenues on my final budget, my struggle has always been with that I'm showing in my budget that I'm going to receive more revenue than I know I actually am going to, because I'm not going to spend those funds. Therefore, I'm not going to draw down those funds. You know what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I just don't, I guess I'm having a hard time following is how that presents a problem.
Well, if you're trying to iron your budget down as closely as possible, so that your actual expenditures, your actual revenues are going to be reflective in the final budget, it just always seems strange to say that I'm going to spend every penny of my Title I, Title II, Title IV allocation if in fact I know that I'm not going to be able to in that given year. So I just wondered if there was any clarification on that guidance. That slide, it seems like, without going back to it, that slide stated that it should match, but then it also said on the same slide that it should be the same or less. So that was kind of where I was looking for a little bit of guidance there. So I'd heard that it needs to match perfectly.
If you don't spend anything, it would be less. But yeah, you don't draw down everything, but you're not speaking of overspending or spending more than what you budgeted for. Yeah, got you. Yeah.
I'm spending less.
Yes.
See, one of the reasons for that is federal law says that you should spend your federal funds in that year that they've been allocated to you.
Right.
And you must have a plan to spend all your funds. So we encourage you to look for ways that you can spend all your funds.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Jenny, did you get your question answered from what Andrea linked?
Yes, I did.
All right, I think that we're all set with questions at this time then.
David, there's one more question that just popped up.
Are there recommendations for signatures on certs?
Yeah, it's the employee and their direct supervisor.
I think they're talking about maybe because of the time, they can be done electronically, yes. They can, we did talk to our office about that, and they can do an electronic signature and that will be fine.
Yeah, there should be some documentation of that electronic signature where we come out, we'll ask you to show us that information.
So the last several pages are contact information for pretty much everyone in our office. And please don't forget to fill out the exit survey that's linked in the bit.ly as well. And we will find a way, like we talked about earlier, to get you the recording of this as well. And if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to your consultant. But if, David, if you want to, this slide here has our director, Paula Daniels. We have a whole child specialist now too that's on that page. Sorry. And then the curriculum and instruction unit is on this page. And then of course our fiscal unit manager. And the next page is our public school academies unit, our regional support unit, which is us. Fred Williams is our manager. Nate Beelan is now the indigenous consultant as well as a regional consultant. We have our school improvement unit, which is still led by Bill Witt, and our special populations unit, which is led by Michelle Williams. And then on the next page, these are just all of the consultants. The main number is at the top. It's at 2. Oh, that's the wrong phone number. That should say 241. It's supposed to be 517-241-6970. And then each of our emails, and if you go to the next slide, it should have, teams 4 and 5, as well as the foster care consultant, Kathleen Haney. And I believe that's it, David. I'll check one more. Oh, I lied. All the special populations, their main number is the 2416974. We have a new Title 1C migrant consultant, Michelle Matson. She just started recently. Dawn Carmody does Section 31A and Title 1D. Kelly Alvarez is an English learner and immigrant for both Title 1 or Title 3 and Section 41. And then we have our early literacy MTSS Section 31A. We have a new Suzanne Grambush. She's new. We have Joan Jackson and Stephanie Holmes Webster. And then our Section 35, which is the early literacy grants, our coordinator is Kelly Flaminio. Next. That's it. So there's the exit survey there in the bit.ly. Thank you guys so much for coming. Is there any last questions in the chat box?
I had a comment, Shelley, and that was, I had a separate email about state layoffs. You probably heard about it. We got notified yesterday. Just for your information, we will be everybody at MDE is, almost everybody's is getting laid off one day. So one day of the week, we will not be available. We're not allowed to work. So some of us will be taking Friday or Monday. We know it's either Friday or Monday. So that's changed a little bit during this presentation. But we'll put that on our signature page, and you'll be notified the day that we're gone, that we're not available. So I just wanted you to know that.
And that lasts through the end of July, as far as we know at this time.
Temporary layoff, but.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. It was a great meeting. Please fill out the exit survey when you have a minute. And thanks. Let us know if you have any questions.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
David, for hosting.